How are y'all doing? This is forewarned long ago. Let's see if we can recognize any names that could possibly have any knowledge or interest in, U.S. government drug involvement. Nord Davis Jr. I have stated again and again since 1984 that George Bush and others close to him, including the so-called Pink Team, have been involved directly in the cocaine drug trade from Central America. I named the CIA-owned Costa Rican corporations directly involved in this drug trade. They're using shrimp fishing boats with the cocaine frozen in with the shrimp. I told of the secret sailing course code that would ensure that these CIA-owned fishing boats would not be intercepted by the U.S. Coast Guard. Former military intelligence officers, risking their pensions and perhaps their lives, have verified to me that these statements are correct and widely known among the professional intelligence community. Senator John Kerry, Democrat, Massachusetts, has held extensive hearings into the money laundering and the use of Panamanian banks for drug operations. This was reported in the New York Times. He claims to be very concerned about it. However, he does not intend to do anything about it. Remember back in 1988 when the U.S. imposed economic sanctions in Panama to halt this money laundering? Well, after these 26 men gave their lives during the Panama invasion and Noriega is safely silenced, these sanctions have been suddenly canceled. If the invasion was really to stop drug trafficking as well as illegal money laundering, the sanctions would have been increased, not reduced. Yet as of March 26, the U.S. has released $480 million in funds which were frozen while Noriega was in power. Panama is in receipt of this money, yet they have not informed the Panamanian citizens. Hundreds of government employees are not being paid on time. Some are not being paid at all. So instead of increasing the economic pressure on Panama, your Congress approved the first payment of $42 million to be sent to Panama as part of a $1 billion U.S. aid package. We have a hunch that some of this money is to protect the Bush family investments in Panama and to make the Panamanian tourist trade again popular, so the Bush string of hotels and resorts will start to make money as planned. The George Bush hand-picked new president of Panama, Mr. Endura, he is soon to marry his 24-year-old mistress and is on a special diet so as to lose some 150 pounds for the wedding. However, all the Latin love stories aside, the fact remains that Endura is a director of a Panamanian bank used exclusively by Colombia's Medellin drug cartel. Do not be so naive as to think that anything has changed with the sacrifice of 26 of our finest men in Operation Just Cause. The George Bush hand-picked Vice President of Panama, Mr. Ford, who is also the chairman of the Banking Commission of Panama. As it happens, he is also part owner of the Dade Land Bank of Florida, which was named in a court case 2 years ago as the central institution for the drug cartels. The George Bush hand-picked new Attorney General of Panama is Mr. Cruz, and according to the New York Times, is one of the bosses of the Cali drug cartel of Colombia. What I saw in Central America and what I know and published from other sources has proven to be true and accurate. The U.S. government under Bush is making no effort whatever to rid the Panamanian government of officials tied directly to drugs. If he did, they would quickly give their stories to the world news media and bring down a scandal that would make Watergate and the Iran-Contra scandal seem insignificant by comparison. History may record that George Bush was the most dangerous man to ever serve as President of the United States. He must be impeached and impeached quickly. I am not so naive as to suppose that it is going to happen. On February 8, 1990, ABC Evening News carried a report regarding the congressional testimony by Senator Harry Reid, a Democrat from Nevada, who complained that U.S.-based oil companies were not being regulated in the shipment of chemicals necessary to the production of illegal drugs. Two of these chemicals are acetone and ethyl ether. The oil companies, whose chemical affiliates are Exxon, Chevron, and Shell, are sending these chemicals into Latin America with the full knowledge that this is its only commercial purpose there. George Bush has refused to sign an executive order prohibiting or limiting the shipment of these chemicals. The New York Times on February 10, 1990, even carried a story by Robert Pear where it is stated that President Barco of Colombia demanded that Bush stop the shipment into his country of the drug chemicals. The leaders of Peru and Bolivia have also demanded that these drug-making chemicals originating in the United States be stopped. I maintain that the world government set up in secret during January 1989 is outside the law and without legal standing. Therefore, I claim my common law rights as a citizen and am not a subject who must submit to search of my home, person, papers, and effects without a properly drawn Fourth Amendment warrant signed by a judge in my county setting forth under oath the probable cause for believing there is a criminal activity or activities taking place on my property. Here is the point. Read this carefully. Under American constitutional law and the laws of every one of the states, there is no such thing as a civil crime. All crimes, even a humble traffic ticket, are legally criminal in nature and jurisdiction. The only jurisdiction wherein there can be a civil crime or where any court can impose such a penalty is under Admiralty Maritime International Law. By what authority does an American walking around with an ounce of marijuana come under the international law of the sea? Isn't he supposed to be under the law of the land? What is the only way that a citizen of the United States of America can be reduced to a person subject to Admiralty Maritime Law without constitutional rights? Only by contract. By what contract has an American been forced into this jurisdiction? There may be a number of them which he is absolutely unaware of until it is too late to unravel his personal affairs and then timely claim his lawful rights. With all due respect to my friend Larry Patterson, no federal law can be passed that will do away with the Fourth Amendment. For an American to be subject to search and seizure without a Fourth Amendment warrant, he must have already waived those rights by contract, or he must have failed to object timely prior to the search. I am not going to take time and space to list those typical contracts wherein many have waived, albeit inadvertently and perhaps through fraud, their common law rights. That has been published previously by others. However, with all due disrespect to Attorney General Thornburgh, I am not a person subject to such searches without a warrant. I am not under the jurisdiction of any court who can impose such prosecution for civil violations. Are you now beginning to see why I must write on so many seemingly different subjects and then show how they blend together? It has long been my position that the totalitarian socialists, which include George Bush, they want the use of drugs going on as a means of softening up the next generation in preparation for the New World Order. If this were not so, they would stop the drug-producing chemicals going to Latin America from American firms and intercept the millions of dollars going through American banks to Panama, Israel, and other cooperating offshore banking nations. There are no bank reporting requirements if the money is wired offshore. If you carry huge amounts of money through customs and fail to report it and get caught, it is a crime punishable by a prison term. However, the built-in loophole for the drug dealers is that money wired offshore need not be reported and is not to be reported to the government by the banks either. A drug dealer can walk into any bank in America, lay down $200,000 in cash, and have it wired to a Panama bank account that he has set up on his own vacation there. He can then direct the same bank to wire the funds back to the bank from which the money was initially sent, and there are no reports required to be made. This is done all the time without breaking any U.S. law. The funds are thus legally laundered, and there is no record kept of the huge cash transactions. The Bush administration wants to have it that way. Drugs can be stopped anytime the American people get fed up enough to do something about it on the local scene and in local courts. Exactly 10 days after the illegal Bush invasion of Panama, the Los Angeles Times of December 30th, 1989 ran a story which exposed the Bush family deep involvement in the Panamanian financial affair to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Yes, the Bush family has that kind of money. Yes, sweet grandmother Barbara Bush knows all about it. And for those of you who have written here asking about her, yes, it is true. In the January letter, I mentioned a $4 million bribe that was paid to Noriega by the corporation for permits to build Panama's hydroelectric plants. I can now document that this bribe was arranged by the Bush family. It was paid to General Manuel Noriega for a special license for this power plant project. Then, according to the investigative staff of the Los Angeles Times, the bribe money was taken, but the license was not issued as promised. This forced a showdown between the corporation and Noriega, or stated more specifically, a test of wills between Noriega and the Bush family. You must understand that Noriega is a low-class person. He never learned any culture and did not understand the deeper workings of the world power elite. He thought that he could control what went on in Panama, and when push came to shove, it is believed that Noriega was about to nationalize some or all of the Bush family's $350 million worth of investments in retaliation for the U.S. indictment of him in Florida. He looked upon this indictment as a betrayal of him by his friend George Bush. He did not understand that Bush had no control over that indictment, and once it had been handed down, there was little he could do and still keep up the pretenses of being the quote-unquote leader of the war on drugs. I agree with Lawrence Patterson's assessment of this sinister situation. He writes, 26 men died to protect the Bush investments in Panama. The obvious fact is that the invasion of Panama was hatched by our president, not because he is concerned about the drug dealing going on in Panama, but to protect his family's $350 million investment in the Marriott and other resorts in Panama. For this reason alone, the decision to invade Panama was made. Thus, we are left with the obvious conclusion that the 26 men who died in battle and the 324 men who were wounded in capturing Noriega for George Bush were sent there on a personal mission to eliminate a potential threat to his presidency and to protect the Bush family investments, not to control the flow of drugs into the United States. That's from Nord Davis Jr. And I appreciate everybody listening to these. I am just going to step out now. Oh, there's so much more. Later.